October 27, 1942. South Pacific, 300 miles northeast of Guadalcanal. USS Enterprise CV-6 limped through dark waters, trailing smoke from 3 bomb hits that had torn through her flight deck. Fires still burned below decks. Wounded men filled the sick bay and overflowed into passageways. 44 men were dead, 75 more were wounded. The Battle of Santa Cruz had ended. Enterprise had survived. Barely. Captain Osborne Hardison stood on the bridge, reading intelligence reports with growing dread. USS Hornet had been sunk earlier that day. USS Saratoga was still under repair from torpedo damage. USS Wasp had been sunk by submarine in September. The mathematics were brutal and simple. Enterprise was now the only operational American aircraft carrier in the entire Pacific Ocean. Across hundreds of thousands of square miles of ocean, the United States Navy possessed exactly one functional carrier. Meanwhile, the Imperial Japanese Navy still had multiple carriers operating. The strategic balance had shifted catastrophically, and Guadalcanal was hanging by a thread. Without carrier air support, Henderson Field would fall. Without Henderson Field, the Marines would be isolated and overwhelmed. Everything depended on Enterprise, a carrier that by all rights should be in a shipyard, not sailing toward another battle. The decision had already been made. Admiral William Halsey needed Enterprise operational immediately. There was no time for proper repairs. On October 28, 75 Seabees Naval Construction Battalion engineers were transferred aboard the moving carrier. They went to work immediately. Welding equipment was set up on the flight deck. Steel plates were cut and shaped. The sound of acetylene torches echoed across the water. Seabees worked in 12-hour shifts, welding, cutting, patching the torn flight deck. They worked while Enterprise sailed at 20 knots toward the enemy. Chief Petty Officer James Richardson, one of the Seabee welders, later described the experience. "We were welding the flight deck while the ship was making 20 knots toward the enemy. Sparks flying everywhere, and all the while knowing we were heading into another fight, but we got it done. That's what Seabees do." By November 12th, Enterprise was operational again. Scarred, patched, held together by emergency repairs and determination, but operational. The Naval Battle of Guadalcanal was about to begin. Japanese battleships were approaching to bombard Henderson Field. Enterprise was the only American carrier that could oppose them. The Gray Ghost refused to die. May 12, 1938. Newport News, Virginia. USS Enterprise CV-6 slid down the ways at Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company, the second Yorktown-class aircraft carrier to join the United States Navy. 827 feet long, displacing 25,500 tons fully loaded, capable of operating 90 aircraft. Top speed 32 knots. She was a marvel of American naval engineering, but in 1938, no one could have imagined what she would become. For 3 years, Enterprise conducted training operations across the Pacific, fleet exercises, war games, preparing for a conflict that seemed inevitable but whose exact nature remained unclear. December 7, 1941. Everything changed. Enterprise was returning to Pearl Harbor after delivering Marine F-4F Wildcat fighters to Wake Island. She was running behind schedule, delayed by refueling operations in rough seas. That delay saved her. At 07:55 hours, while Enterprise steamed 200 miles west of Oahu, Japanese carrier aircraft struck Pearl Harbor. The Enterprise Air Group launched ahead to scout the approach to Pearl, arrived during the attack. 6 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers were shot down, some by Japanese fighters, some by panicked American anti-aircraft gunners who fired at anything in the sky. Ensign Manuel Gonzalez, flying an SBD-2 Dauntless from Enterprise, witnessed Pearl Harbor burning from 3,000 feet. The entire harbor was on fire. Battleship Row was a mass of flames and smoke. We could see ships capsizing, men jumping into burning water. I was 22 years old, and I realized at that moment that everything had changed forever. This wasn't a training exercise anymore. This was war, and it was going to be terrible. Enterprise herself narrowly escaped. Had she arrived on schedule, she would have been moored at Pearl Harbor when the attack began. The Japanese had specifically targeted American carriers. Enterprise would have been their primary objective, but fate had other plans for the Gray Ghost. Within hours of learning about Pearl Harbor, Vice Admiral William Halsey, commanding Enterprise's task force, ordered an immediate search for the Japanese carrier fleet. Enterprise would not wait for orders. She would not retreat to safety. She would hunt. The carrier that would become the most decorated warship in American naval history had entered the war. June 4, 1942. Central Pacific, 200 miles northeast of Midway Atoll. Enterprise sailed as part of a three-carrier task force with USS Yorktown and USS Hornet. American intelligence had broken Japanese naval codes. Admiral Chester Nimitz knew the Japanese planned to destroy the American carrier fleet at Midway. He had positioned his carriers for an ambush. Everything depended on finding the Japanese carriers first. Lee. At 0700 hours, Enterprise launched her strike group. 33 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers, 14 Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, and 10 Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters. Leading them was Air Group Commander Lieutenant Commander Clarence Wade McClusky. The strike group flew southwest based on the last reported position of the Japanese fleet. But when they reached the expected coordinates, the ocean was empty. McClusky faced a decision that would change the course of the war. His aircraft were running low on fuel. Doctrine said to return to the carrier, but McClusky knew the Japanese fleet was out here somewhere. If they weren't found now, they would strike the American carriers first. He decided to continue searching. McClusky later described the moment. We had been airborne for over 2 hours. Fuel gauges were dropping into the red. Every pilot in the formation knew we were pushing beyond safe return range. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were close. I extended the search northwest, gambling everything on intuition and mathematics. Then I saw it, a single Japanese destroyer making high speed. She was heading somewhere important. I followed her wake. That destroyer was rushing to rejoin the Japanese carrier fleet. At 0920 hours, McClusky's formation spotted 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Saryu, and Hiryu. They were refueling and rearming aircraft on their flight decks, vulnerable and exposed. McClusky didn't hesitate. He ordered the attack. The Enterprise dive bombers pushed over into near-vertical dives from 14,000 feet. The SBD Dauntless was purpose-built for this mission. A scout bomber and dive bomber capable of carrying a 1,000-pound bomb and placing it with devastating accuracy. 2-man crew pilot and rear gunner. Perforated dive brakes that allowed controlled descent at terminal velocity. Lieutenant Richard Best, leading one section of Enterprise dive bombers, later recalled the attack. We came down through anti-aircraft fire so thick you could walk on it. The carriers were turning hard, trying to evade, but they had nowhere to go. I put my 1,000-pounder right into Akagi's flight deck. Saw it punch through and detonate in the hangar deck below. Secondary explosions started immediately. Fuel, ammunition, aircraft all going up together. Within minutes, she was a floating inferno. Enterprise dive bombers struck Akagi and Kaga. Yorktown aircraft hit Saryu. In 5 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were burning wrecks. Hiryu, the 4th carrier, launched a counterattack that crippled Yorktown but was herself destroyed by Enterprise and Hornet aircraft later that afternoon. By sunset, 4 Japanese fleet carriers, the core of the force that had struck Pearl Harbor, were sinking into the Pacific. Japan had lost not just the carriers but hundreds of irreplaceable, experienced pilots and maintainers. The Battle of Midway turned the tide of the Pacific War. And Enterprise, specifically Wade McClusky's decision to continue searching despite low fuel, had been crucial to that victory. But Midway was just the beginning of Enterprise's war. August 1942 through August 1945, the Pacific Ocean became Enterprise's battlefield. The Pacific Ocean became Enterprise's battlefield. After Midway came Guadalcanal, then the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. where Enterprise aircraft helped destroy over 600 Japanese planes in a single day. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, the largest naval battle in history. Iwo Jima, Okinawa. 20 major battles, 20 battle stars earned, more than any other United States warship in history. Enterprise participated in 18 of the 22 major Pacific carrier actions. Her aircraft destroyed 911 enemy planes. They sank 71 enemy ships. The carrier survived kamikaze attacks, bomb hits, near misses that buckled her hull, and submarine torpedo spreads that somehow missed. The Japanese kept claiming they had sunk her. Radio Tokyo announced Enterprise's destruction after the Battle of the Eastern Solomons in August 1942. They announced it again after Santa Cruz in October, again after the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal in November. Each time, Enterprise reappeared in the next battle, her aircraft striking Japanese positions, her presence disrupting Japanese operations. The Japanese Navy began calling her the Gray Ghost, the carrier that refused to die. Japanese Captain Tamakasa Maechihara, destroyer commander who encountered Enterprise multiple times, later wrote, "We sank that cursed ship at least 4 times in our official reports. Each time, she appeared again like a demon from the depth. Our pilots feared her. They knew her silhouette, knew her aircraft markings. When reports came that Enterprise was in the area, our commanders changed their plans. She was more than a ship. She was a symbol of American persistence, of their refusal to accept defeat. But persistence came at a terrible cost." Lieutenant Howard Jensen, Enterprise pilot who flew missions from Guadalcanal through Okinawa, described the reality behind the legend. "We lost friends every week. Good pilots, experienced crews, just gone. Shot down over the ocean, crashed on landing, hit by anti-aircraft fire. Enterprise kept fighting, but the faces in the ready room kept changing. By war's end, I was one of the few original pilots left. The ship survived, but she consumed men like fuel." Throughout the war, Enterprise's crew rotated constantly. Pilots completed tours and returned stateside. Sailors served their time and were replaced. But the ship continued, maintained by dedicated mechanics, engineers, and damage control teams who kept her operational through battles that should have sent her to the shipyard for months. Lieutenant Commander Herschel Smith, the damage control officer who had supervised repairs after Santa Cruz, remained with Enterprise for most of the war. His teams patched bomb damage, repaired shrapnel holes, kept the carrier fighting when lesser ships would have withdrawn. The Gray Ghost earned her name not just by surviving, but by refusing to stop fighting. May 1945. Off Okinawa, a Japanese kamikaze, Mitsubishi A6M0 fighter loaded with explosives and flown by a suicide pilot struck Enterprise's forward elevator. The explosion killed 14 men and wounded 68 more. The forward elevator was destroyed, blown completely off its mounts. Enterprise continued flight operations using her remaining elevators. Damage control teams fought fires in sealed compartments. Within hours, aircraft were launching and recovering again. Seaman First Class Robert Cressman, assigned to damage control, witnessed the kamikaze strike in the aftermath. The Zero came in low and fast, too fast for our guns to track properly. Hit right at the waterline near the forward elevator. The explosion was enormous. I was blown off my feet 50 yards away. But within an hour, Chief Smith had crews fighting the fires, shoring up bulkheads, getting us back in action. That was Enterprise. You could hurt her, but you couldn't stop her. By August 1945, when Japan surrendered, Enterprise had earned 20 battle stars, a Presidential Unit Citation, and a Navy Unit Commendation. She had sailed over 300,000 miles. Her aircraft had flown tens of thousands of sorties. She was the most decorated warship in American naval history. The war was over. Enterprise had survived every battle, every kamikaze, every bomb. Then came peacetime, and peacetime would accomplish what the Imperial Japanese Navy could not. August 15, 1945. Japan surrendered unconditionally. Enterprise had survived the entire war. 20 battle stars, Presidential Unit Citation. More combat actions than any other American carrier. The gray ghost that refused to die in battle had won. But victory brought an unexpected enemy: budget cuts and indifference. The United States Navy demobilized rapidly after the war. Hundreds of ships were decommissioned, placed in reserve fleets, or sold for scrap. By January 1947, Enterprise was decommissioned at Bayonne, New Jersey. Her crew dispersed to civilian life. Her aircraft were removed. She sat silent at the pier. There were plans to preserve her as a museum ship. Public campaigns raised money. Veterans organizations lobbied Congress. Enterprise had earned her place in history. Surely America would preserve its most decorated warship. The Navy studied the costs. Maintaining a museum ship required money, facilities, and ongoing support. Post-war budgets were tight. New carriers were being built, supercarriers that made Enterprise's design obsolete. The Navy's priority was the future, not the past. In 1953, all preservation plans were canceled. Enterprise remained in the reserve fleet, slowly deteriorating. Her hull rusted. Her equipment was cannibalized for spare parts to keep other ships operational. The Gray Ghost became a parts depot, her legend fading as newer carriers took her place in the active fleet. Commander Thomas Blackburn, who had flown from Enterprise during the war, visited her in the reserve fleet in 1956. Seeing her like that broke my heart. Rust streaking down her hull, weeds growing on her flight deck. This was the ship that saved Guadalcanal, that won at Midway, that survived 20 major battles, and we were letting her rot at a pier in New Jersey. It felt like betrayal. She deserved better. The men who died aboard her deserved better. On July 1, 1958, the Navy sold Enterprise for scrap. Purchase price, $561,333. The most decorated warship in American naval history was worth less than a single modern fighter aircraft. She was towed to Kearney, New Jersey. Over the following months, cutting torches dismantled her piece by piece. The flight deck that had launched aircraft at Midway was cut into scrap metal. The hull that had survived kamikaze attacks was melted down. The Gray Ghost disappeared into blast furnaces. Veterans learned of the scrapping with disbelief and rage. Letters flooded Congress. Why had America allowed this to happen? Why preserve lesser ships while destroying Enterprise? The answers were bureaucratic and unsatisfying. Costs. Priorities. Limited resources. The kind of institutional logic that looks reasonable on paper but feels monstrous in retrospect. Former Enterprise pilot Lieutenant Robert Gibson expressed what many veterans felt. We saved that ship a dozen times during the war. Fought to keep her afloat. Patched her up. Brought her home. And then America threw her away like garbage. The Japanese couldn't sink her, but we scrapped her. That tells you something about how quickly nations forget. But Enterprise's destruction changed something fundamental in American naval heritage preservation. The public outcry over her scrapping helped inspire the modern naval museum ship movement. Within a decade, other carriers were preserved. USS Intrepid, USS Hornet, USS Yorktown, USS Lexington, USS Midway. The lesson was learned, but too late for Enterprise. Today, small relics survive. Her nameplate is displayed at the Washington Navy Yard. Her bell is at the Naval Academy. A few artifacts exist in museums. But the ship herself is gone. 911 enemy aircraft destroyed. 71 enemy ships sunk. 20 battle stars. 300,000 miles sailed in combat. 18 of 22 major Pacific carrier actions. More decorated than any American warship before or since. Enterprise survived everything the Imperial Japanese Navy threw at her: bombs, torpedoes, kamikazes, 20 major battles across 3 years of continuous combat. The Gray Ghost refused to die in battle, but she could not survive peacetime indifference. The sailors who welded her flight deck under fire off Guadalcanal, the pilots who flew from her deck at Midway, the damage control teams who kept her fighting through Santa Cruz, they deserved better. The ship that helped save America deserved better. Enterprise is gone. But her legend endures. In every carrier that bears her name, including the current nuclear-powered USS Enterprise CVN-65 and the future CVN-80, her spirit continues. In the veterans who served aboard her and the historians who preserve her story, she lives on. The gray ghost that refused to die in battle became the ghost that haunts American naval history. A reminder of what we lost when we forgot to honor what we had saved. Enterprise was more than steel and machinery. She was proof that courage, persistence, and sacrifice can defeat overwhelming odds. That temporary repairs and sheer determination can keep a wounded ship fighting. That legends are built not by avoiding danger, but by sailing toward it again and again. The Japanese called her the Gray Ghost and feared her appearance. Americans should remember her as the ship that refused to surrender, the carrier that saved the Pacific, the most dangerous warship of World War II, and the legend America allowed to slip away.